the government announced that it would still be giving aid to India. So the UK government is going to be giving about £1 billion in aid over the next few years to India. And there was a huge outcry among the public and among some ministers about why this country that has such a high GDP growth and seems to be doing so well, 11th largest economy in the world, why they need aid from countries like the UK. But the example that everyone really took exception to, and what really bothered people, was that India has a space program. Why doesn't a country like India have a space program when it's so poor? And it's true, India does have a very sophisticated space program. I did see it. I went to ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organisation in Bangalore, and I also was very lucky to see a rocket launch in South India. And it's something to behold, this amazing space research organisation built entirely from scratch because India does nuclear weapons research. It's not allowed to import any of this technology from overseas, so it's done it all in-house. And the question is, why does it need it? And my answer to that would be high technology is not always an extravagance, and I'll explain why. India's space program began around the 1960s. So when Neil Armstrong went to the moon, that's when the Indian Space Research Organisation was founded. And in that year, the complaints you get about, complaints we've been having about India now were triple-fold. That everyone was saying, here is a country, parts of it on the verge of famine. Why do you need a space program? And the legacy of Nehru meant that there were scientists in very high positions in India. One of them was called Vikram Sarabhai, who was this huge technocrat, also studied at Cambridge, very good friend of Nehru's, a rocket scientist, a physicist. And his argument was that India needs high technology. Nehru said that we need technology to build this country up, and he said, I'll prove it. So he started this space program, and he said, it will be modest. We won't be like NASA, we won't be like the Soviet Union. We don't need to send people to the moon, but we do need satellites. Now, of course, at that time, satellites weren't of any use to anyone. They weren't really used very much. But they built up this satellite program, and it took a really long time because there were import restrictions, like I said, into India. And in around 1975, after Nehru had died, they sent up this first satellite into space. It was a big success, I mean, one of the guys who designed that first satellite was very good friends with Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer. And Arthur C. Clarke around this time had come up with this idea, and it sounded outlandish at the time, that if we have 3 satellites in space around the Earth, positioned just equidistantly at the right position, we can cover the entire surface of the globe. Which means, so those 3 satellites can cover the entire surface of the globe, which means that you can have a communication system based on those satellites. They can communicate with each other. And when he first came up with this idea, everybody was like, no, that's never going to work. We're never going to get 3 satellites perfectly synchronized and, run a communication system off that. But then by the 1970s, the US was doing it. And India said, we want this as well. And they did it. They built this geosynchronous satellite system. 1980s came, India's IT industry started. By the 1990s, when India was starting to outsource IT software to the West, when it needed communication system, they were in place because the space program had created these cheap satellites and sent them up into space already. The communications network was there, and it meant the IT industry could use that to do the outsourcing work that it did, and it meant the millions of Indians who wanted mobile phones could have them because the satellites were there and they were cheap, and the communications were cheap, so they could have cheap calls. Today, the IT industry in India, the software outsourcing industry alone, is worth billions. By 2015, it's estimated it might be worth 20 billion, I think, although I have to check that. But it just goes to show that that technology, which once, this very high technology, that was once thought to be an extravagance, has turned out to be a linchpin to Indian growth. Without it, India would be much poorer today, and people would not have the mobile phone technology or the cheap calls that they enjoy today. Those satellites, in turn, are running telemedicine and teleeducation, which means that kids in poor villages can see lectures given by professors in rich cities and get an education that they would never be able to get. It means that patients in villages where they have no access to good hospitals can be treated by doctors sitting thousands of miles away, all thanks to these satellites. So the point I want to make is that when we look at India and we say, why is this country racing after high science and high technology? The question we shouldn't be asking is why. It should be why not. They deserve it and they need it. And if history has taught us anything, it's that investment in science and R&D pays off in the end. And that's what I want to leave you with.